And then I can also, if people are interested, I can email it to you later. I'll just need to get your email address before you leave. So first and foremost, I really want to thank Carolyn, who was just gracious enough to allow us to do this workshop in conjunction with her Common Ground exhibition at the Meadows.
I do nothing, and I'm grateful to you guys.
Thanks. And then also I want to thank Allison for hosting us here at this lovely gallery.
Thank you for being a guinea pig student.
For sure.
Always happy to be guinea pigs.
Yeah. So since this is a community-based workshop, I'd love for us to introduce ourselves, maybe talk about some of the reasons that you're here, so maybe it's some of the things that you're worried about or just thinking about and what kind of got you to get here. Sorry, got you to be here. Long week for me. And then maybe just kind of gives me a good idea of what we're kind of working with moving forward. If you would let me know what kind of laptop you're using. Looks like most people are on Mac. Makes me feel so much better because I don't have a PC, so it's kind of hard for me to know what settings and stuff, and it's pretty much formatted for Mac.
Unless you're running Windows XP, I'm very much know all of those things from back in high school.
So I'll start out the introduction just with myself, since I'm obviously already the one talking. So I'm Melanie Clemmons, if I haven't met y'all. I'm an artist and an educator. I teach digital hybrid media at SMU. And in my practice, I'm a new media artist, so often the work that I'm making is not only displayed on tech and made with tech, but it's about tech. So because of that, I'm really critical of the tech that I use. And that includes some of the topics that we're talking about today, like surveillance, especially surveillance capitalism, and just security and privacy in general. I'm not by any means an expert in security, but because of my background as an educator and also because I'm interested in security as an activist standpoint, it's important to me to share the knowledge that I have. And then, of course, I would offer to y'all that once you have this workshop or whatever other interests that you might have, that you could also lead your own workshop. Just to share that knowledge, because a lot of the times people are just kind of by themselves keeping that knowledge together. So if we share and share and share and share, more and more people will become more aware and more secure, which helps everybody else out.
Yeah, and oftentimes we find that whatever we teach this within our, oh, by the way, I'm Zach Loyd. I'm also an artist and educator. I'm the new media visual art technician at UNT. So I get to oversee all the fun new media toys and equipment and facilities. What I was going to say, whenever we teach this, workshop or talk about digital humanities or digital, security with our students in introductory courses, a lot of times they see it as kind of dry or boring, or they think it's futile and they don't care. They're I don't care what information is getting out there. I think that's something important to kind of drive home that these are your rights, and these are things that are guaranteed to you, and you should be considering with your practice, your social media practice. Yeah, that's me. Would anybody else like to?
Annalise, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm Annalise. I'm a graduate student at SMU, and Melanie came to speak in our grad seminar class about a cybersecurity workshop that she held, and I thought that was a pretty awesome way to spread security about your information on the internet, so I was looking forward to today.
Cool.
Thank you. And are you iPhone as well?
I am.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody Android? Show of hands. Cool. Me too.
Zach's our Android expert. I know nothing.
Expert loosely. I use it.
I'm David Fremmerman. I'm just an artist.
Cool.
Cool.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming.
I'm Trey Burns. I'm an artist too. I'm running the live stream.
Tamara Johnson. I teach at SMU with Melanie, so anytime Melanie's doing something, I just go to it because I want to hear all of the knowledge she has.
Thank you.
And also pretending to do this.
You're doing great. You look like a natural.
Slow, dramatic pan.
Yes.
Slow zoom
Into the eyes.
Oh, okay, so I'm Allison and I run Exofilm. I was thrilled that Melanie had proposed this workshop to me a while ago, and I couldn't find a good time
Sounds like it. Cool. Thanks.
So I'm Ryder Richards. I'm here to support my wife's paranoia.
It's important, yeah.
Some working hypotheses are that excessive concentrations of power are always dangerous,
Mhm.
that a balance of power requires a balance of knowledge. So I'm surveilling who has access to what information.
I'm very interested in that.
I'm Ian Schisler. I'm a programmer by trade, but I have an art background. I guess you could say I'm a free software advocate. So I've been involved in that for a long time.
You said free software, like open source, and yeah, cool. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank y'all for coming. on
Yeah,
this
thank you
Sunday.
so much for coming. You know, I kind of envision this as being workshop-y. The way that the slides and like the notes work out, like I'm afraid that it's going to feel like a lecture, but please jump in anytime. You know, I hope that y'all, if you have questions or if you have comments or something similar to that, you're more than welcome to do that.
And like we said, we aren't experts, so if something seems erroneous or not completely correct, or you want to jump in and kind of clarify anything, if you have that knowledge, like we're totally open to that. We aren't, you know, a top-down pyramid style of knowledge. This is unilateral.
Not at all. So Zach kind of mentioned this earlier, but whenever we've done this kind of work before with students, it's a lot of the times it feels like they don't want to know the information or they're not that interested in it. I could go into whole other reasons why I think that is, but the fact that you guys are here is really heartening to me because it means that you care and that you want to learn more about it. So I'm excited that you're here. One of the things that may happen though, if you go into the world and you try to kind of teach other people about security, is that you'll, or in my experience, maybe y'all are different. In my experience, people don't care because they don't think that they're doing anything wrong. They're just like, oh, I'm not doing anything illegal, so I don't really need to be like clamping down my security settings. And like for a long time, I really struggled with how to explain to people that they should care. And originally it was what Zach was talking about. Well, it's your rights, so maybe you should, like, you know, consider them a little bit more.
Because if you apply that same logic to, you know, if you say I have nothing to worry about, so I don't really care who is, you know, invading my privacy or being able to see my things. I mean, would you say the same thing about the First Amendment, right? Like, oh, I don't have anything to say, so I'm going to give up my right to say something. I mean, it's the same. You can apply that to, you know, to privacy. And then it becomes a slippery slope when those things start to erode. Then, you know, less and less, you know, freedom is retained.
Right. So, and then when I read Snowden's latest book, he has a point there that I thought was really profound and kind of solved a lot of the problems that I had in struggling to be able to convey to other people why they should care. So he says that saying I don't care about privacy because I don't have anything to hide is also saying I don't care about privacy for someone that might have something to hide. And you're destroying their future for your convenience. So even if you're fine and you're protected, that's good. But if you continue to work with security and try to help others with it, then you can also help people that, you know, it's not just about criminals, it's people that need privacy, like other kinds of citizens, whistleblowers, domestic abuse survivors, stalking victims, journalists, activists, people living under and perhaps trying to escape oppressive governments.
An interesting variant on that I've heard is it's also like saying, I don't care about freedom of speech because I don't have anything to say.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Exactly.
alarming.
Yeah.
You know, and I think like the other thing, maybe I shouldn't even be getting into this, but there's a phrase that people use a lot that's like, it's something, it's similar to that. It's, what's the Goebbels thing? It's like people that have something to hide don't mind like giving up their rights, basically.
Uh-huh.
And that's used actually a lot in security, like in legislation for security. But that actually is attributed to Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, which I'm just like, that to me is alarming. So maybe we don't want to be using that kind of language. But again, that's an aside.
If you don't mind, I'll throw in one more thing.
Yeah.
Daniel Ellsberg has made the point that it doesn't matter if you've done anything wrong. All they need to know is what you care about,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
and it gives them leverage.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
totally.
In any kind of way, it doesn't. Yeah, and it's not necessarily just like the government. It could also just be other kind of criminals or hackers that you're trying to protect yourself or your family from. So, there's a lot of different ways that the reasons to care about security and privacy break down. And again, you're just, you're helping yourself and other people whenever you do care about that. So.
And just knowing that those systems exist, those systems to strip you of, your privacy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a fairy tale.
Right.
In our journey to becoming more secure, there's largely 3 different methods of change that we can enact. Physical and digital are the easier of the 3 to implement, and we'll do some of that today, particularly the digital ones. Usually involves a product or a download or something like that. The harder one to change, obviously, is your behavior. Made even harder by the fact that these systems are designed to keep us lazy, to keep us from being secure, because they benefit from our data. So we've all clicked through the terms of service agreements. That language is specifically hard to get through and specifically really easy to click through because, again, people don't really want to know what's happening with their data. It's easier to just click through to get to the thing than to sit there and take the time to realize what's happening with it. So it's not really your fault that these things are hard. It's not your fault. I'm sorry, did I just bum you out?
No, I would just like to know why.
Oh yeah, okay, good. It feels like as we move forward, it feels like if your settings are one way that you've been doing something wrong and it's embarrassing kind of because you didn't know, but I don't want you to feel that way. Like I said, it's not your fault. These systems are designed to keep you out of that loop. Mm-hmm. So don't feel bad, just maybe apply the energy that you have moving forward to becoming more secure.
And those anxieties are real, the anxieties of technology and tech changing, getting a grasp on how, your privacy settings work or the way in which you interface with the computer and people getting stuck within that or being, not wanting to change, pushing against those things, right? So, that's completely fine, but just always having that constant striving to, further knowledge of these systems, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. So, yes.
So a factoid I heard about the terms of service, that if your job all day, every day was to just read terms of service, it would take you 78 days to read all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awful.
that's the other side of this scrolling behavior, right? Is that
Yeah.
you don't have the time or the consideration, and you know that even if you disagree with something in there, then you don't get access to the service.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they sort of built that. You're right, the system is built around you just looking at ignoring it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Throw out one more factoid.
Yeah.
Almost all of those terms of service, there are some that at least initially they sound like, oh, this isn't so bad. But they almost all contain a clause that the terms can be changed at will.
Yep.
Oh, well.
And even if you know that the guys that founded it and are running it have really good intentions, they also usually have the right to sell the company and move on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, not a reason to give up, but to be aware of.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
most definitely.
I feel like that's all the only clause you need is that doesn't matter, we can change it at any time.
Mm-hmm. Pablo.
Special guest. So in terms of behavioral changes, one of the really good things that you can just start doing is having more awareness whenever you're using anything online or any sort of kind of technology. So as a professor, I work in a computer lab. And to me, it's kind of shocking to see the things that students do in those computer labs. Mm-hmm. First of all, students don't ever log out of their accounts.
No.
Either their accounts online or the actual computer, which is, that makes you extremely vulnerable to anybody that can go into that computer lab at any time.
And just as anecdotal, experiential, whenever I'm maintaining the new media computer lab that we have, I go through and try to, clean things up or make sure people's accounts aren't logged into after a class. And I would say probably 25% of the computers have some sort of sensitive data that's still logged into whenever I'm on there. And it'll be like people's, Amazon accounts and things that is tied to, their credit cards or, their.
Yeah.
It's very tempting to, you've been hacked, but.
Other things I've seen them do is shopping online. So again, like in class, which another day I'll talk about why that's a problem for me. But for in terms of security, that's really simply having anybody in that classroom, if they looked over on your screen, could see, other kinds of sensitive data that you're working with, like your credit card information.
And people who have all of their accounts aggregated, like they are a Google user and all of their photos back up to the Google. I mean, there's been very embarrassing me waking up a screensaver and if someone having opened their Google photo album and things, and it's
So
it kind of blows my mind that there wouldn't be the amount of awareness to log out of the thing, or even just close the window, right? To just actually walk away from the computer with everything logged in.
So all those cautionary tales, just to say that when you're using these technologies, it's really important just to be aware of who's around you, who could possibly be benefiting from looking at your sensitive data. It's not just in a computer lab. I think just any time that you're using it, especially in public though.
Mm-hmm.
Adding on to that awareness is the fact that our cell phones these devices hold all kinds of sensitive information, as well as double as tracking devices. And so they're probably the most vulnerable pieces of tech that we have, and we carry them around everywhere. And even just like right now, both of Zach's and I's phone are on this table. I mean, yes, I'm sitting here, I'm very aware that it's here, but it's really easy if I had to go to the bathroom that I would just get up and leave it here, right? So just again, practicing more and more awareness about where your devices are, and when you're leaving them, who's around whenever you're leaving them. Just the same way that you would care about if they got physically stolen from you.
Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that is the ubiquity of these things, right? You're in a coffee shop and everybody has their MacBook Pro, everybody has their phone out, and it just kind of seems like the sense of security becomes lax, right? Because everybody is doing the thing. It's like, oh, I can go to the bathroom, no one's gonna mess with my thing. But right, I mean, if you think about 15 years ago, you would have never done that, right?
You couldn't leave a desktop
right.
at the coffee shop.
But just the sense of value or something that these devices have, and I think ubiquity kind of undoes that sort of yeah.
Definitely.
The value in the data as opposed to the value that's contained in this information.
Or even just the hardware too,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely. So also practicing awareness comes in handy when you're considering your text messages. So I think that because we are so intimate with our phones and our computers that we think when we're sending something to somebody that person's only the person that's going to read it. Of course, we can do certain things like encrypt or use end-to-end encryption with SMS, but that doesn't stop people if I texted Zach something from him telling someone else. So you just kind of, another layer to this is thinking about, well, who, does that need to be said over email or text? Do I want anyone to be able to read that at a later point?
Yeah, or even posting screenshots of.
One girlfriend who but she keeps texting me about drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Great example. Yeah.
Hey man, I got some great stuff coming in this weekend.
Yeah, too.
What are you doing?
Exactly.
I love her.
Yeah, and that's definitely the sort of thing that there are police stations do route some SMS messaging through their stations and are able to read that, and there's countless examples of people getting caught for drugs that way. So again, just practicing awareness around what you're sending and who you're sending it to and how that might end up in the world later.
Mm-hmm.
In a few years when it's illegal to be liberal, this will really come in handy.
Yeah, right.
Right, yeah. I mean, here in the U.S. for sure. But in other countries, these are things that people are one of the reasons people in other countries utilize so many of these same tools that we're going to be talking about today is because they actually have to.
Have the
They
oppressive
cannot have
governments and authoritative systems that you have to subvert or get around or
Yeah.
Neighborhood death squad.
Yeah.
So similarly, in terms of behavioral changes, just beyond just being aware, is to practice caution. So the fappening, for example, or the iCloud leak of celebrity nude photos, that hacker gained access to those celebrities' emails, not by hacking in a very sophisticated way at all. They used social engineering. So, they used phishing. So basically, they sent an email to Jennifer Lawrence, let's say, from an account called Apple Privacy Security, warning her and other victims that their accounts might be compromised, asking for their account details. And they responded back with their emails and their passwords, which the hacker then used to gain access to their account, downloading stuff, and then sharing them out. So again, it's just, a good idea to vet things. If you get a weird email that's asking for any of your information, it's good to look at that, email address, search it. Same thing for spam phone calls, of course. Just making sure that once you're giving that sensitive data out, that again, it's going to the person that you think it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was like,
So do you feel like it's safe to say, Melanie, because I feel like I'm so skeptical. Anytime anybody's emailing me and asking me a question at all, I'm just like, nope. So I'm wondering if there are clues or ways or languages in those emails that are kind of red flags for that.
yeah.
I'm always just I always just think everything is trying to get me.
Yeah.
I
that's
think
good.
any time they're asking for sensitive data, I think is a red flag.
Right? I'm just trying to think of when somebody would
Yeah.
actually ask for sensitive data.
It's very rare that you would get an email that needs that information. So it's kind of a red flag in general that it comes up. So like Zach's saying, anytime someone asks, that's the time to vet. But there are telltale signs like typos, like grammar not being really correct, because a lot of hackers maybe not first English speakers. It's the first language.
Also looking at the email address that they're sending from, if it looks kind of funky or it's, it looks like a Google letterhead, but it's not a Google email address. And also just searching that email address out and seeing.
Put that email address in the Google search too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll give you a really good example of this just recently. So as a net artist, I have a bunch of domain names, and I usually set them up on auto renew so that I don't lose that. And just recently, whenever one of mine auto renewed, because that information is public, someone on PayPal sent me an invoice saying, you need to renew your website, and then the from address was just the GoDaddy logo.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it didn't fool me. I didn't pay for it. It didn't get me, guys. But it certainly made me stop and pause and look at my actual account and be like, okay, well, I did pay for this. I did get an invoice from them. I don't have to do it this other way.
But I think it's good to just have that skeptical eye on everything. Mel's really good about that, where we recently bought a car, and you have all these different people calling, and the bank calling, and things like that, and Mel's just like, how do I know who, you say you're this person, but how do I know? And
I
they're
think
like,
I
what?
actually pissed him off, but
Because they don't
he's
expect that, but
fine,
they
I'm
should
sure.
expect that, right?
Yeah. If you're talking about sensitive information like my bank information, then I'm for sure gonna vet you.
Does anyone use GPG style encrypted email?
I don't.
That's
Yeah.
kind of the gold standard.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a program called Mailvelo.
Mhm.
It's a browser extension that will do GPG style ASCII armor on your email in the browser. So
Right.
you don't even have to have a special program.
Oh, that's great. That's really good.
probably the gold standard,
Right.
both in terms of security of the transmitted data
Mm-hmm.
and in being able to verify this was sent to me for sure by that person,
Right.
because it uses public key encryption,
Right.
which is kind of the gold standard.
Oh.
Right.
But there's a big question mark around quantum computers
Mm-hmm.
that prime number factoring could, fall apart, or things that we assume are true about cryptography itself.
Could completely undo.
Which is what happened in World War II,
Mm.
right? Like the Nazis thought an enigma was secure.
Mm-hmm.
The British figured out how to make it not secure at terrible cost and trouble, and that's going on now.
Oh, for sure.
And I'd say too, most journalists and stuff use that kind of email address that you're talking about. There's a bunch of different services like that. I would love for you to say that name again. And
So you can do it with any email
Yeah.
client.
Any web-based email.
that's
That's
great.
cool.
Yeah.
And how do we know mail envelope is not run by the government?
It's open source, so
Yeah.
you can review the source.
Okay.
No,
A much
cool.
bigger question is the provenance on the components in your operating system.
Right,
It's-
right.
It's been shown many times that the global corporate, family of influencers is suspect in playing along.
Have back doors to their, yeah.
Yeah.
There are NSA keys distributed in Microsoft Windows. It's like, hey, it's even called NSA keys.
Yeah. And I saw the CIA did that with, I think, VLC player too, or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
VLC is a video player.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably got found out and got pulled out.
Yeah, yeah.
So along these kind of lines, it's also good to ask yourself if you use the cloud and if you have to use it. So I will say right now, I fully recognize the irony of me using Google Drive to share this information with you. That's a personal decision. But anytime that you use the cloud, you're giving your responsibility. You're outsourcing that responsibility of the storage and the security to the service that you're using. So in terms of what I've done today is that I've made the risk of having Google Drive save this information just so that I can have the convenience of using it here. It's not the best option. It's I'm a person. That's a mistake that I've made here using this cloud service. But it's also one that I've made knowing the risks involved because of sorry, I'm just getting distracted by my own GIF. It's one that I made a risk, or I'm taking the risk here, perhaps because I know that I'm going to share this information later. Like this whole thing will be out online for everybody to see.
That's always the struggle, right? The risk versus convenience. I mean,
yeah.
And then finding that balance for whatever you're trying to do with the thing.
So again, it's a behavioral change, and I know it's hard, but practicing caution in your communications and when you use the cloud, when you trust it, or if you don't ever, those are just kind of things to think about moving forward to become more secure. All right, so in terms of another arm of this behavioral change is whether or not you need a Google Assistant or any kind of smart assistant or even a virtual assistant like Siri or Hey Google. Which, did I just trigger yours?
Huh? Oh, no, I don't think so. I think it knows my voice now.
I always, when I do it in class, I say the cursed name, Alexa, and then students' phones are, signaling, or Siri. So these are really, really convenient for everyday tasks, and as well, they help people that are differently abled. So I'm not here to just talk down on them completely, but again, it's just being more aware of what happens with them. So Amazon, Google, and Apple have said that no, they're not spying all the time, but you do give them access to your microphone whenever you use a wake word. So in Alexa's case, her wake word is Alexa, right? Hey Google is a wake word for Google. Siri is a wake word for iPhone.
And for that to work, the microphone has to always be on.
Right? Yeah, definitely. So we know that those three services record every time that you use a wake word, but of course they're made by humans, and it's made using artificial intelligence, which still is improving. So because of that, there are errors that can occur. For example, a couple was talking about, they're kind of disputing back and forth about these hardwood floors that they wanted to have in their house. And Alexa somehow misunderstood and thought that they triggered Alexa. They recorded that conversation. Alexa further misunderstood and thought that they wanted to send that recorded information to one of the contacts, at which point that recorded conversation was sent to somebody. Right. So Amazon says that's a super rare occurrence. Of course, people have come out and said, no, it's not. This has happened to me too, as well as these other mishaps. And Amazon's just saying, okay, well, we're still not going to suspend that kind of service because we need that information to improve our products. I will say that iPhone, though, did just in August and September, did say that they stopped recording and saving all of your Hey Siri messages. So it's now an opt-in program. So by default, everybody's opted out, and then if you want to help to improve Siri, you can opt in through the settings on your phone.
So they say.
So
which is kind of the running trope of all of this.
Right. Other Internet of Things devices have a whole host of problems associated with them. So Internet of Things devices being like smart fridges or smart coffee makers or smart light bulbs, et cetera, et cetera. They're notoriously easy to hack because a lot of them come with default passwords that people don't change. So a lot of them are just like password or username password or default or one or whatever. It's really, really easy to get into them. Also, a lot of these Internet of Things devices use 2G rather than 4G to operate, which is an older version, and therefore there's a lot of vulnerabilities associated with it that people that are already like sussed out. Like a lot of people already know the ways that you can get into those products. So they're really vulnerable, and if you do use an Internet of Things device, I highly recommend, of course, to change that password to something more secure. This is especially true if it's like a webcam, like a pet cam or a baby cam, something like that.
Now, I found something interesting with like the Nest and the Ring cameras. If anyone is on, what is it called, Nextdoor, which I think is very problematic in terms of like the people who use it and what they're using it for, and kind of the paranoia that gets like spread through it. You see that often with Amazon Ring and Nest. People are like, look at this suspicious person, and oftentimes it's a person of color just walking down the street, right? So it's reinforcing this this paranoia and this like social economic prejudice and bias, which I think is strange, right? You're trying to be like safer, but you're actually making things less safe and less inclusive because of your self-surveillance.
And so this link that's on the slide here goes to the Intercepts report of the Amazon Ring. So they just recently came out with a story, I'm going to read a quote from the story. Let's see. So the story basically details how Ring plans to use facial recognition to create AI-enabled neighborhood watch lists. Which many think that this is an exceptionally bad idea, myself included, because as AI continues to exhibit race and gender biases, we're still going to see those in these neighborhood watch lists.
Mm-hmm. And there's also there's a lot of these police department incentives that are like, hey, we'll give you a free Nest, a free Ring, to sign up, and then we'll have access to it, and fuck that, right? Why
would you not accept these things?
Right?
Yeah.
It's for free.
Yeah. And so there's that side of it, which I think is alarming, but there's also the side of that, which again, these things are easy to hack into. So there's a whole podcast called Nolecast, where the hosts hack into Ring and Nest cameras, harassing their unsuspecting owners. Nolecast, Null. I will say, if you're writing that down to check out, that the way that they harass the victims they're like yelling like racial slurs, like it's not. That's why I didn't include it on here, because I don't recommend it to anybody, because I don't agree with doing that. But it's just like an example of how easy those are to hack into.
Mm-hmm. And 4chan and those sorts of black hat sort of entities and things have been doing this for a long time with different webcams and security cams and things. But with these things becoming ubiquitous, it's a lot easier, and there's just more data, more sources to hack into. And I'm sure you've all seen pretty recently the person hacks into 8-year-old girl's camera, and it's also kind of why is there a camera in her room? But whatever. Saying I'm Santa Claus, and that then starts to become into the mainstream just because of the narrative around it or whatever. And people are still are starting to get suspicious via these news stories, but it's still, I think it's kind of behind.
Mm-hmm.
And then also are people gonna deinstall their Nest or Ring? I don't know.
Right. So this is just kind of like a art break. So there's a art project that I really, really love by Zach Blass called Facial Weaponization Suite. So basically these masks that you can see here are created in community workshops where everybody in the workshop gets their image scanned, and then they put them all together, and then they fabricate these masks for people to wear. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the artist statement for this piece.
Also the same clown costume.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Great day to be a juggalo, I guess. So let's see. The masks are used for public interventions and performances. One mask, the fag face mask, generated from the biometric facial data of many queer men's faces, is a response to scientific studies that link determining sexual orientation through rapid facial recognition techniques. So that's the pink mask. And then there are two others. Another mask explores the conception of blackness, the inability of biometric technologies to detect dark skin as racist, the favoring of black and militant aesthetics, and black as that which informationally obfuscates. So that's the meaning behind the black mask there. All right, so back to this. So is anyone here, so you have Android, do you ever use the Hey Google sometimes? So, or is anyone here uses Alexa? Oh, yes. I like to see that. Yeah, you saw Paranormal Flyer.
However, I know that some of us
Yeah.
will probably be in spaces maybe over the holidays that
Yeah.
people who are using those things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I recommend going to them. Just unplug. Don't have to tell anybody.
Throw it in the garbage disposal.
Yeah.
Trey's brother was just recently using Alexa like in the car.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like a new feature that it's like CarPlay and Alexa or something like that. Yeah, you don't like it. So you can,
Amazon's really been doubling down with just adding
yeah.
Alexa. So they have like, I think some glasses now that have like little speakers in them that are like Alexa enabled, and they have like a ring that you wear that's like, I don't know, like it's Alexa everything.
But even if you use like an Amazon Fire Stick, which I use because it's helpful to have, it's helpful in art projects to be able to just connect without having a media player. You can just use a Fire Stick instead. But that has a feature on it that's a microphone where you can just like go to stuff. So I was just kind of curious and I used it, and then I realized, oh, well, of course that's being recorded. So you can actually delete those recordings if you follow this list here. And so if that's true for Alexa, that's true for any other kinds of Amazon-based apps that have any sort of microphone function on them.
Just take a step back. Jonathan Molina Garcia says he uses Alexa, so.
Hey, Jonathan.
He's watching the other. He also said this is a great episode of Black Mirror.
Yes, all I've ever wanted. So if you do use Alexa, and on the Alexa app, you can just go to the settings and scroll down to history, and then you can actually read the phrases that you've used because they're transcribed by Amazon employees, and then play back the original recordings and then choose to delete them. With Hey Google, there's a little more of an interesting step in terms of like an artistic perspective, in that you can actually download all of the Hey Googles that you've used. So they'll show up in just your Google account and under data and personalization and under web app activity. They'll all be listed there. Zach has some, which he was going to play for y'all.
Which I do use in the car. I guess this is recently. I said Home Depot. I have to speak with that cadence so it,
So it understands.
It knows. Here's me trying to speak to Spotify. Okay, Google. Play Shy Girl. Right. So you can start digging through these things. I'm thinking like if you're trying to make like a surveillance diaristic piece or something, right?
Yeah, like Jill Maggot or Sophie Call. So yeah, you can download that stuff. You can go to this space to delete them as well.
I think it's also interesting to hear how you speak to your tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an article or podcast about the gendering of the assistants and the way people interact or speak to their assistants, partially based upon the gender of the thing. So being like very demanding to like a female voice, and like what that entails, what the ramifications of that are.
Also heard that they're less angry at a female voice, right? So I don't know where these are coming from, but we also play with ours. I think mine's a British female right now because I can't be angry at her. The accent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, personal
Yeah.
biases in terms of what voices.
Devices are training us just like you have to say Home Depot a certain way. Right? So our behavior would change more than them changing their algorithms to fit us, at least right now.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that inevitably they'll get better and better at what they do to pick up what they need from us. So we maybe, I don't know, but either way we're modifying our behaviors for them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting process to go through to see what our evolution becomes to sort of serving these devices.
Kind of a weird
For sure.
symbiotic sort of thing. Yeah.
That's like that. You're touching on something that is a huge concern of mine, which is social cooling. So, and this is more geared towards like the surveillance and surveillance capitalism aspect, which is that we're changing our behavior because we know things are surveilling us. So social cooling, like cooling down, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So because you know things are surveilling you, then maybe you're too, like nervous about searching for things that you need to know about. So kind of like an example I can think of is like, well, what if somebody lives in a really small community and they don't have access to other ways of being or living in the world, but they're maybe, they're not out, or they're still like nervous about finding other information like that. So they then don't choose to use the internet to find that information. It also, I think, changes human desire. It changes the way that we even, it limits our beliefs in our brain because we don't want to put that out into the world. I find that to be really, really concerning.
Because you can't be yourself, or you can't extend your ego online.
Yeah, it makes you less human, I think.
Yeah, you have something really important to say that's subversive, and you don't end up saying it because who's going to be watching, and what are going to be the ramifications of that if I put that out onto Facebook or onto Twitter or onto...
What kind of sailors are you being put on?
Yeah, or what if my employer sees this thing?
One of the things I have up right now, if you use Google, is your Google activity controls. So, for example, I have my web and app activity on right now just because I wanted to show you. All you have to do is turn that off. They're just saying, okay, if you turn this off, we're not going to save your history, we're not going to save your audio recordings, and I can just pause that. And there's a bunch of options here for you. So there's location history if you don't want to be tracked by Google. So that's true if you're searching things while you're out and about. Your YouTube history. And that's just a nice, I think, way to go a little bit so that things aren't saved up against you. Oh. Yeah.
It's previous.
Oh, it's in this slide.
Is it? Yeah. Well, it's if you go to your Google settings, so I'll do that right now. Let me just close this. Your history.
Are you guys going to cover GDPR?
It's not part of this lecture. Did you have?
Just that's an interesting example of actual laws starting to be made in Europe to enforce this notion of that if you're a commercial company, you just can't suck out information on everybody and just paint it and not.
Sorry. And then on it there was just a bill, in the process of being introduced to the Senate, COPRA, which is sort of the U.S. version of that. I don't know. I haven't
It's
found it this morning. I read a lot about it.
COPRA.
COPRA.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, Senator Cantwell, wherever she's from.
That's cool.
I know for a while Texas had a law against collection of biometric data. So whenever, I guess it was a year or two ago now, when the Google Arts thing, where it's find a portrait that looks like you or a painting, you couldn't do that in Texas because there was a biometric collection. Because that's basically what these things are, right? What do I look like as a baby? And it's kind of well, you get the cute picture of you as a baby, but then where is that data going?
What is that helping to improve?
Right.
Really watch the United States because Sesta Fosta, it's purportedly about protecting children and stopping naughty porn, is a super powerful intrusive weapon, as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was. Everybody just kind of DMCA, what's that?
Yeah.
DMCA radically reorganized the meaning of copyright, where it ceased to be about I copied a book that I don't own and gave it to somebody, that's illegal. Now it's any company can put a digital protection mechanism around any content, and if you attempt to defeat it, you're breaking the law. Even if it says you can't pass the word through commercials, it's whoa, how do we lose those rights?
Even on content they don't own, they can just be oh, no.
But even weirder, on content you own.
Yeah, exactly.
Commercials on, and then it's illegal to build a VCR or build a DVD.
Yeah.
It's all gone now.
Yeah. Yeah,
to build a device that you could fast forward.
it's wacky.
Okay, so if you're following along and you do want to change some of those options, you can go up into your Google account and go to Manage Google Account. And that should take you to this screen.
And
We can go to Data and Personalization. And then this Web and App Activity. I'd say this is also the screen too where you can turn your ad personalization off, which if you're like me and you're not cool with surveillance capitalism, I would recommend to turn that off because that just means that you're still going to get ads, but they won't be as personalized. All right, so also just on this same vein, while we're doing these kinds of things, if you have Siri on your phone and you want to turn that off, again, it's just going to be in your settings, under Privacy, and Analytics and Improvements way down at the bottom. So you can first just turn off that. That just means that whenever you do record anything in Hey Siri, that it won't record and send that to Apple. That actually should be off. I think we just recently had like an update. So because it's now opt-in only, that should be turned off for you. No, it's okay. Go into your settings. And then the privacy one. And then yeah, all the way down at the bottom is Analytics and Improvements. And that should be off. I don't know, unless you've like opted in recently.
So what would be the downside to that ad personalization?
So
My dad's always like, I love this. They know exactly what ads to send me.
Exactly.
But I don't know. I don't know how to like say, no, it's bad.
yeah.
It'd just be like, how
So-
much money have you spent because of those ads? You know what I mean? Because that's kind of the surveillance capitalism thing is like, oh, that's exactly what I need. Like,
There's
do you need
that.
the thing?
I think, so for me, the reason I don't like it is because I don't like to opt into anything that has anything to do with surveillance capitalism. First of all, we don't know the effects of it. So, like, we don't know the wide-ranging, long-lasting effects of it. But the things that we do know that have happened as a result of surveillance capitalism are 2016 US presidential election interference. First being the Internet Research Agency that created a bunch, it's like the Russian troll farm that created a bunch of different ads for people that manipulated things, and then also Cambridge Analytica being the larger one that people are really, really aware of.
Because if you think what is an ad, right? It's a representation of desire. So if these are your desires and they have that information, they're able to, control you via your desire.
Right. So then, too, if you have Siri, and you've had that on, and you want to make sure that all that stuff is deleted, that you're just like, okay, yeah, I don't think I feel very comfortable with her. Again, that's just going to be in settings. Actually, I don't know if I have that there. I apologize. So that newer update, it's settings. And it's just Siri and search, so it's not inside of privacy. And you can just turn that off. All right. Cool. All right, so some physical changes that you can make are just some really basic ones. I think a lot of people do this now without really even being prompted. It's just putting a little piece of tape or something on your webcam. So some people go even further. They have little devices that you can buy for your phone to just slide your phone on and off. But there's also the mics that you have to worry about. So another little device that people have, I think this is $20, which is a little mic silencer that you can plug into your computer. You can do this DIY if you just have like an old pair of headphones and you can just cut that off at the jack and just put that in. Of course, you might want to wrap that in electrical tape. You probably don't want just wires hanging out. It's not very safe for you. I'd say too, this is like more common. This has become more and more common, not just because people are becoming more aware about it, but because there's multiple pictures of Mark Zuckerberg that has his camera taped, as well as James Comey, the FBI still director? Can't keep track.
No,
Old director. Who not only covers his own, but also specifically warned everybody to cover theirs. So I feel like, all right, I'll take that.
Yeah, the powers that be are doing it then.
Yeah.
As well.
Oh, and also, of course, screen protectors. So if you use your phone, your smartphone around other people, maybe you are like my students and you're online shopping or using Tinder or whatever in class, you might want to grab a little screen protector. If you've ever worked like in a medical office, you're probably really familiar with them for your laptops or the desktops and stuff that you use as well. So just like we were in the settings and stuff before, you can go back into privacy. So just settings and privacy, and under microphone and or camera, it'll show you which apps have access to those things. So you might be familiar with some of them. So like, for example, I don't have any, but Shazam, the app that tells you what an audio piece is, or music. I'm too much of an art nerd, sorry. So that one obviously would have the microphone. But then you might look and you might see other things that you're like, okay, why do they need that access, right? So then that just shows you what is all using that, and you can turn it off. The same thing for the camera. So like earlier when I was looking through, I saw that Lyft has my camera on. Don't know why. I've never needed to use my camera in a Lyft. But so that's just a good example of where it's. Yeah, you can turn them off there.
It's going to affect the functionality of whatever
So do you think
devices
it's
are
like
going to.
whenever you're just using like Skype or whatever, just turn it on for the time you're using it and then turn it back off?
Yeah.
And you can get real granular about it, where you say Skype can have access to this, but Lyft
nothing else.
can't.
Yeah,
or-
that's what I have. Like my location is off for everything except for Google Maps. So as a pedestrian, I mean, maybe it's not the safest, but I'm not gonna like pull out an atlas to get around Dallas. Like, you know.
At least on Android, you can turn off background network communication so that then whether it has access to a peripheral or not,
It can't send it out. Mhm.
That's good.
Yeah, there's definitely ways that you can kind of customize these privacy settings depending on, the balance between the functionality and, the privacy.
Also, role-specific devices is a good idea. Like people I know who are concerned, like very concerned about security, like having an air-gapped system that is not connected to a network is a good idea.
Right.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, it like blew my parents' minds when they get a new phone every year or whatever, and then they're like, "Well, I can't use my old phone." And I'm like, "No, it still works. It's just not connecting to your cellular data. You can still do all the things on it." And that can be kind of like, you disable Wi-Fi, and then it becomes kind of an off-network, off-grid device. Yeah, that's great.
So some other physical things that you can do are use Faraday cages or pouches. I have an image here from a really cool exhibition that I saw at Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art in 2016 or 2017 from the group Finishing School. They basically created these different little pods that you could go into, and it's all lined with materials that block out all kinds of signals. So as a viewer, it felt really like safe and comforting and like so quiet to be in there. It was really easy to forget how long you had been in there. It's kind of like a sensory deprivation tank, I guess, where no technology pretty much worked, or you don't have any access to outside technology. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that. No. So some of the ways that I've seen people use these on a really practical basis is that if they go to an airport, they'll stick their phone into a Faraday pouch. And that's just because a lot of times at airports, there's a lot of public Wi-Fi, or there's a lot of ways that people can go around the basics that you need on your phone, like your password, to be able to read what you're doing. Government entities usually.
Actually have a purse insert. Supposedly does that. And you can have your wallet in there and all your stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone told me that y'all were thinking about using some Faraday cages.
We have
The pouch, yeah.
I'm making a big one.
Oh, cool.
I thought we were doing that.
Oh,
Oh.
yeah.
I'm creating stuff. I'm gonna build like a big walk-in one for a show.
Very cool.
Cool.
No, it'll be a page, definitely a page.
They're conductive paints.
Mm.
Paint your room.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's cool. We had a friend in Austin
Oh.
whose mailbox was a Faraday cage, and they would ask you to like
Put your stuff
put your
before
phone
you
in
went
the,
in.
Yeah, they lock it up.
Right,
I like it. It's like a nice welcome break.
Yeah.
So in terms of moving over into like digital changes that we can make, there's something we can do right off the bat, which is use this tool called panopticlick.eff.org. So on Panopticlick, you can do this test me feature, and then it'll test how well your browser does protect you from different tracking. So while that's loading, I'm going to talk a little bit about who creates this tool, and that's the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Their mission statement describes them as a nonprofit organization defending civil liberties in the digital world. At the end of the slides, I have like a whole list of links and resources that you can follow, which they're included on. And if you leave today wanting to know more about any of this, I highly recommend them to move forward, to learn things about. They just have really, really good repositories of information about this stuff, including breaking news that has to do with tech. I'm a big fan of them. So for mine, I know that since I have certain add-ons on my browser, it's letting me know that my browser is blocking ads, that it's blocking invisible trackers, and that it's stopping trackers that are included in the acceptable ads whitelist. So there's a couple more work that I can do here. So I can protect my browser from fingerprinting, which I have a link to do that there, as well as unblocking third-party promises to do not track. So if you are a little unsecure here, if you have some of these results on the top 3 ones that are no, you can really simply install some add-ons. I'll get there in a little bit, like Privacy Badger, HTTPS everywhere, and then use DuckDuckGo instead of Google. There's some really useful resources for you. You may also be wondering, which browser can I use that may be the most secure? There's a report that came out in this year in 2019 that obviously Tor is going to be the most secure one, but if you're not, which we'll get to in just a second, but if you're not ready to use an onion routing browser, then you might want to look at Firefox or this new browser called Brave.
And also going to just kind of browsing habits, I would recommend anytime you're using, especially a public computer, and you need to log into a personal account, always open up like a private window or incognito mode or something, so that when you close that out, it'll automatically log you out of everything.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go back up a little bit. All right, so just some general basic good hygiene to practice whenever you're using any kind of digital technology in terms of getting into these like digital changes that we can make. It's always good to update as soon as possible. Updates, they're usually fixing bugs. So all of the software that we use, all of these apps that we use are created by humans. If you've ever met a human, you know that we are very fallible creatures.
We're buggy.
And we're buggy, yeah. And so updating those as soon as possible is really good practice to get into. I know that it's like, for some reason, it feels like a lot, like it feels like, oh, I need to use this tool right now. I don't have time to update. But it's relatable. Okay, good. But updating as soon as possible will keep you as safe as possible. This is certainly true on a Mac. So the reason I have a question mark after antivirus software here for Mac is that a lot of people agree that if you just update as soon as possible on Mac, that you don't necessarily need to have any sort of antivirus software. You for sure can, and this list here that I have linked under Mac question mark shows you some different options for antivirus software that you can use. But I'd say that if you're ever using a PC, it's a super good idea to use antivirus software. Well, practicing good password hygiene, which we'll get into a lot just here in a second, is also a very good idea, as well as automatically logging out of your computer. So that's something that people will leave open, again, if they're going to the bathroom, or maybe you're just going to your bag to check something, but setting your computer up to log out is what you want to do. And you can do that really, really simply in your settings. So on the right side here, I have perhaps an old version of Windows that shows you, but on Mac, if you just go into Apple in the top left-hand corner, System Preferences, we'll go to the Security and Privacy here. And this first option under General is that you're asking it to require the password. So if I drop down here, you can say immediately. I just have a minute on here because sometimes I'll be doing something and then I need to come back to this. But that's just, again, in your Apple settings, security and privacy, and that's under that first tab, General, where you can change your required password. Okay. Oh, sorry, let me close this. Okay, so let's talk about Tor. So, a setup, I'm sorry, Trey. I just crunched the microphone. A setup for privacy that, would use a different router than the ones we just talked about, Firefox and or Brave, or Chrome or whatever, Safari, is one that's referred to as onion routing. So onion routing works by sending your web traffic through several different relay nodes before it actually reaches the internet. This is useful because it means that under most circumstances when you're using Tor, that what you're doing online isn't easily discernible and it cannot be traced easily back to your IP address. So, if you're not familiar with IP address, it's just the unique number associated with your laptop and the connection that you're making to the internet. One of the most popular onion routers is Tor. And to download Tor, it's really just a simple process of going to the website and choosing whichever option is best for you. Okay. So I was just going to do just a quick demonstration. So I already have Tor on my computer. And I was going to show you what it looks like if I search for my IP address on my regular browser. Just refresh this real fast. Oh no, I demonstrated too hard. Basically, before it just showed that I was in Richardson, so in near this area. And then if I move over to Tor, and I search for my IP address, and we're getting to a point that I was going to make about Tor in just a second, which is that this is a real trade-off for convenience. So because it has to go through all of these different relays, it's a lot slower than we're used to using for your browsing traffic. And this is just what goes back to those behavioral changes that I mentioned. It's just one of the things that you have to get used to if you need to be using a browser that's more secure than the ones that we're used to using. All right, so this one is saying that I'm in Chicago, which is obviously not where I am. It's a different IP address. So it just kind of masks the activity that I'm doing. If you do download Tor, it is, as you were saying at the beginning of the workshop, it is, some people say that it immediately flags you for, okay, what are they doing? Why do they need Tor? There's a lot of people that use Tor for a lot of different reasons. And I think it's maybe just up to you if you feel comfortable enough to download it. Basically what happens on like a IP side is that people can see that you're using Tor, but they can't see what you're doing with it. So that kind of brings back this idea of metadata. So anything that you do online has some sort of metadata associated with it. So because we have to sign in to our email, we have a password that someone else doesn't have. Whenever we go there, we can see that, okay, well, they went to their email and they used their email for 15 minutes. In my case, probably like 6 hours. But so you can see that you're using those type of services. With Tor, however, all it can see is that you're using Tor. It can't see what you're actually doing on the site. So this is a thing because if you're using metadata, just because someone can't see exactly the text that you're doing or exactly what you're looking up doesn't mean that they don't have like sort of an idea of what's happening. So a really good example of this is like somebody who has their location on their phone on and they are calling the suicide hotline from like a bridge destination. So it's pretty clear at that point what's going on in that person's life. That's sensitive information that you may not want anyone else to know, right? So that's, again, it's an example of why you might want to use something like Tor to hide the metadata of the things that you're doing. Okay, So some other tips with Tor, like I said, be patient. It's a really slow process. Whenever you're using Tor, you don't want to log into personal accounts because that's a way that other people using Tor can see what you're doing and get your password pretty easily. You want to go ahead and disable any plugins or don't enable any plugins. You don't want to torrent on Tor because it kind of is antithetical to the whole purpose of onion routing. You want to be careful what you click on, and then be careful, of course, who you're trusting. So when you use Tor, because it's this more secure connection, so a lot of people use Tor, for example, to use the Silk Road, or do they? Is it still gone?
I think Silk Road's still gone.
Could be gone if other ones pop up in their place.
To do illicit things is like the reputation that it's garnered, right? This is where the pedophiles are. This is where the drug, cartels are happening. Which is true, but then there's also so many other usages for this, especially in oppressive regimes or certain types of research or communications.
And so, just to be clear, just like on the regular internet, you don't really know who you're talking to, even if you think that you do. And so there's a lot of law enforcement agencies that have people set up on Tor to kind of trick you into thinking that they're someone else.
I do have a Tor story.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, please.
There's one of the guys that's involved in a free software project I'm involved in Germany. He actually ended up in court because he was hosting a Tor node.
Oh, wow.
His machine carried the email that got a contract killer to kill somebody. So he ended up in a courtroom having to kind of go like, oh, well, freedom and
Right.
This guy died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really happened.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of the SOPA arguments that people would make. Yeah. So what you're referring to is that, so one of the things that you have an option to do whenever you download Tor is you can also become another relay node for things to pass through. A lot of people will do it because they believe that it's like part of volunteerism and that they want to help other people be anonymous, but that's like a very cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It changed his perspective.
Yeah.
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 Was he able to beat it, or?
He didn't end up getting charged with anything, but he ended up as a witness in the murder case.
Wow.
Wow.
As part of the proof was at this guy's computer, and explain to the court what you did and why you did it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I don't think he got accused by everything, but
Wow.
We-
So here's a link to download Tor if you want to use that.
Limited too, right? Like there's certain kinds of content you can't get over Tor because they're trackable, right? So you can't
Yeah.
watch
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So that's actually a good point, which is that another thing that people can use to hide or mask their IP address rather is a VPN. And a lot of people do use VPN, like if you've ever lived in another country and you want to get your Netflix fix. Because some titles are blocked in some countries, people will use VPNs to be able to watch their shows. It's also used a lot with businesses. You have to go into the VPN to be able to use that kind of email or whatever. I have to use it at SMU a lot. If I'm ever at home and I need to log into some SMU services, if I'm trying to download software or something like that, I have to use a VPN to get in. So it masks your IP address, like I said. Some people prefer them to Tor because they're a little bit quicker and a little easier to use. The good ones do cost though. So the kind of trick here is that people, that there's a bunch of different free VPNs out there, but you kind of get what you pay for there. So it being free means that someone is kind of using something that you're doing.
Right.
So
in terms of monitoring the traffic that's actually going through the VPN,
Right.
What data collection could be happening there.
Just throw out one more thought about using these sort of, techniques or whatever you call them. To resort to, it's not too lengthy, but it illustrates it really clearly for me. I don't know this through my own research, but I understand that during World War II and, Hitler and the Germans were killing all the Jewish people, and supposedly, one of the first steps would always be make all the Jews wear a yellow armband so you can identify them. And in, I guess it was Denmark, the king decided, okay, everybody's going to wear yellow armbands. Everybody wore them, so it defeated the purpose. And that would be another argument in favor of using things like this, because if everybody's doing it,
Right.
it no longer singles you out as a likely rebel or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
most definitely.
Well, we were saying a rising tide floats all boats earlier. So yeah, I mean, definitely, the more and more people do them. So I feel like it's true for all kind of secure settings. Is the more and more people, kind of help others to mask.
It is, yeah. You have to raise that awareness and actually push the culture like towards that thing, and then it becomes the convenience versus security sort of thing. But if it becomes something more, ubiquitous or built into browsers, built in to the software and things, where people don't actually have to like seek it out or have that knowledge, I think that's definitely the way to go about it.
So in terms of like what VPN is good, there's just so many options, so many pros and cons of each. I have linked here an article that has some pros and cons of some VPNs in 2019. It's something that changes a lot, so even next year, if you're looking into it, I would recommend to do your own search to figure that out.
And this is just kind of a general, very like simplified graphic of like how encryption works, right? So you have your plain text, human readable.
Love you, Granny.
Love you, Granny. Very sensitive data, right? That's then needing to be transmitted, right? So encryption is a way of protecting data during transmission. So you have the love you, Granny. It goes through an encryption algorithm that, for lack of a better description, kind of scrambles that into a ciphertext, right? Something that's not human readable or not readable without the shared key. And the shared key is represented by the encryption algorithm, right? So once it's within this kind of scrambled ciphertext, it's pretty much useless to anybody unless you have the corresponding encryption algorithm to then decode the thing, right? Decrypt the ciphertext back into the human readable plain text, right? So anytime we're talking about, and this is symmetric encryption as opposed to asymmetric, which works in a similar way, but you're instead using a public key and then a shared key or a private key. But whenever we talk about encryption, like this is the actual process that's happening.
It's really like you have an encrypt key and a decrypt key, and you distribute your encrypt key to the public. And if anybody wants to send you a message, they take the encrypt key, encrypt a message, and send it to you, and only you have the decrypt key.
With the asymmetrical?
That's with public key encryption.
Yeah.
A good example of where this breaks down in like more everyday life is public Wi-Fi. So Starbucks or the airport or anywhere that Wi-Fi password is either disabled or is really, really widely available. It just means that people are able to kind of bypass some different kinds of encrypted things. Things are not encrypted on those public Wi-Fi networks. An artist, or rather, I think is more of a coder, but creative coder maybe, Eric Butler created this tool Firesheep. It's now obsolete, but I think it does a really good job of educating people about like the dangers of using public Wi-Fi. So basically,
it was also to help. At the time, Facebook wasn't. It didn't use HTTPS. It just used HTTP, so it wasn't like a secured connection there. So it was kind of trying to push people, just raising that awareness that you should be using HTTPS whenever you're using a secured site or login.
So basically what happened is you could download his app, and then anytime you were on public Wi-Fi, it would populate with everyone else that was using it, and then you could see all of the accounts that they were logged into. So that's what this image is showing here, is that perhaps if I was in this public setting that this image was taken from, say Ian Gallagher was also here, and I could just select him and see like in the inside of his Facebook.
Yeah, it would be whenever you ran the plugin and the plugin was running, whenever somebody would, on the public wireless network, log in to their Facebook, then you would get that information. It would basically like show their login credentials, and then you could have access to their account.
If you had a VPN and you were safe.
So that's what's recommended. If you're in a public space, is to, instead of using public Wi-Fi, is to use your VPN to do any sort of thing. So that's highly, highly recommended at the airport, for example.
So in terms of like surveillance, people trying to spoof connections and get your data, there's the Dirtbox, which is a DRT box, which is made by Digital Receiver Technology. That's how it gets its name, DRT. That's actually owned by Boeing. It's a cell site simulator. It's a phone device for mimicking a cell phone tower. So it creates a strong enough signal that it can wake dormant mobile phones, and then it'll switch to that as its like cell connection. So instead of connecting to the cell tower to transmit, whatever data, it's actually connecting to this dirt box, and then whatever agency is utilizing the dirt box can then, scrape that data or use that data. It's used by like the United States Marshal Service, and they'll put them on planes and actually fly the planes over, a group or area where they think, there might be criminal activity or something. Protests. They say it's, only used for people with criminal intentions, but, And then also, who knows how many of these dirt boxes actually exist outside of these agencies, companies that might have them, personal entities.
If you could figure out that they did this to get you, then you could sue the government for it, and that would get you back out of prison or jail or trouble because you weren't allowed to say that this device existed.
Yeah.
But I think that's changed recently.
Yeah, because then who would even have the knowledge of that existing, and that's the way that they got caught or
It was
something.
a secret weapon and it was illegal to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in the last few years they've changed the policy on how that's supposed to operate.
Yeah, and I think that was with Stingray, which was just another implementation of this sort of technology, and mostly with police departments listening in on certain people.
Supposedly it takes you to 2G.
Yeah, GSM. Mm-hmm.
So if you notice your phone has gone to 2G, you're likely that's happening.
Yeah, because the encryption standards of the 3G, 4G, LTE sort of things, this wouldn't be able to pick up those things. It wouldn't be able to unencrypt them. But yeah, it would jam that bandwidth. So then you go down to the GSM, and then that's super easily crackable.
What do you do? Turn it off.
Yeah, you could turn it off. That's where like the Faraday pouch would be really cool to use. There are some people that say, well, anytime you go off the grid, anytime you turn your phone off or it goes into Faraday, that's a tag, because that's not normal behavior for you, right? If you use your phone every day, like really consistently, and then all of a sudden there's a drop in consistency, that's like a trigger. But I guess it's just like weighing the possibility of you being on some sort of list for doing that versus like you hurting, at a protest, needing to not give other information to people, right? Okay, so we kind of already talked about encryption. I'm just going to talk about it a little bit in terms of SMS because I think it's really important. So it's really simple. This GIF is an example from Electronic Frontier Foundation that shows how simple it can be to search through people's SMS texts. So basically what they're doing is they're going into the two different numbers and they're searching one number and they're searching for certain things like for a password. And then that texts that are unencrypted can come up like this. So it comes up as, can you send me the password? And then the actual password. If these texts were encrypted, however, they would just show up like gibberish. So a really good app that you can use to make sure that your devices are using end-to-end encryption, meaning that if somebody finds this text on the way from my phone to Zach's phone, that it's going to be encrypted the entire time. Signal is a good example of that app. So this is, again, something that I'll give like a disclaimer for, that if you're like, in the future you're like looking this up, it's something that kind of changes a lot. Like I used to use Telegram all the time, and then now I can't really use it anymore because there's been some issues with it recently. Signal, though, I think is pretty good. It's by Open Whisper Systems, which is an open source software, so that anyone can see who is pulling the data from that. So in addition to Signal, there's a couple of other apps that you can add to your phone to be more secure. So maybe instead of using Google, you can use DuckDuckGo. There is Tor that you can download for your phone. For iOS, it's known as Onion Browser, and then for Android, it's known as Tor Browser. Yep, they're all available. So all of these from the first four are available in the App Store. I don't know for Android what they are referred to as. Like
It's all the same.
It's all the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yes.
I once heard that Start Page was similar to DuckDuckGo. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I've just really used DuckDuckGo for many years now, and maybe it's just I've gotten complacent or something. But
Start page is like an alternative, like Google. So
Google.
do they have their own browser, or is it something you go to inside different?
You can have it in lieu of another browser, right? It's just like, I mean, I have DuckDuckGo on some of my stuff and start page on other things, and it's the same thing in terms of experience.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's
Yeah,
good to know.
Start page. Let me
Yeah.
check that out.
Start page through Safari. So on my phone.
You
So
can designate it as your home page or whatever.
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, I don't know if it's as good or not. I think it was around before DuckDuckGo, at least I heard about it first, and that's why I still have it on a lot of things.
That's cool. That's good.
This is a fun website, fun, scary, somewhere in between. HaveIBeenPwned.com. If you go there, you can type in an email address and see if you've been pwned, or which is leet speak for being owned. So famous men.
I can't remember if that's my email address or not.
Your P should be that. So if you put in your email address, it'll see if you have been a part of any breaches. Databases get breached quite often, and your email address and password, your login credentials, will get breached and then shared, via Tor, via kind of different dark sites. So this will show, if you scroll down a bit, it will show exactly. These are kind of these are the breaches that you're pwned in. Things that like you have a Dropbox account, you have an Edmodo account, some of these other things. So if you ever had one of those accounts, it's saying like these have been breached and your information got leaked. And then if you actually scroll down further, it'll show down here. Maybe they changed that.
What were you looking for?
The actual like paste documents, where like people would go onto Pastebin or something, and that's where you would find all of these people's sensitive information. You could go and like copy and paste it. But yeah, it's kind of, if you find out that you have been pwned, most likely it was like an older data breach, and hopefully the website or the...
has told you about it, but
Right.
there's cases like Uber didn't tell anybody about it for a while. Their huge data breach didn't tell anybody about it for a while. So
It means owned.
Yeah.
It's like leet speak of
it's like
gamers.
we got
and-
you.
Yeah. So yeah, if you do find out that you have been pwned, it'd be a good idea to change your password. Look at the have we talked about? Oh, that's next. Password hygiene. Right.
All right, so password hygiene. I'm sure this is like really, really, really basic stuff, but I'm going to go over it quickly just because it's good information if you haven't heard it in a while, or maybe you're not super familiar with it. So first of all, having a strong password. So that just means a long password that includes multiple different kinds of things like letters, numbers, special characters. Could also mean that it's just a really long password. Like you don't have, if you're like super opposed to using numbers or special characters, it could also just be a long, complicated phrase. One way to kind of get around having to create your own unique passwords every time is to use a password manager. So one thing about this is that it's cool that recently some browsers have added on a password manager. However, they're not as good as the actual password managers that you can find. So if you've been using like Chrome and it's like, do you want me to create a password for you? And it's like, okay, great, thank you. But those can still be, there's just not as secure as the other ones that you can actually add on to it.
And typically that data is not being stored locally, it's being stored on the cloud, and that is susceptible to breaches as well, right?
So obviously you don't want to reuse passwords on different accounts. I know that that's like a common thing that people do because it's simple, but this is something, again, that a password manager would help you with. You definitely don't want to be giving out your password to somebody, especially through text or email. And then you always want to make sure that you will have logged out of those accounts. The reason I have Sarah Palin on here is because to make the specific case for unique security questions. So normally when you sign up for an account, they'll ask you, like for the security questions to save it later. So like, what's your mother's maiden name, or like, what's your birthplace? So that's all stuff that can be very easily found out using social engineering. So this happened to Sarah Palin. A college student was just like, can I get into Sarah Palin's email address? Turns out they could. Because all this person did was they went to reset the password, or they typed in the password, they were brute force just typing in random stuff to try to get in, And then the login prompt asked, well, like you've entered it wrongly too many times. Like, what are your unique security questions? And for her, it was, where did you meet your husband? Sarah Palin had very publicly talked about the fact that her and her husband had met in high school. Okay, where were you born? Another really public information fact. So, and to the point where they actually finally got in, really, really simply, really quickly. So something that I kind of don't hear a lot, which is why I'm spending so much time to talk about it right now, is that you can create your own unique security questions, if that's an option, or if there's only the option for the basic stuff like mother's maiden name, then this is a point where you can just like make up something weird and random that you would only know because you're kind of saving that information later.
Question. Is there like a way to, I'm just like, okay, so I just like die tomorrow. And like I want to try to be able to get into all my stuff.
I'm not laughing at you die
No,
tomorrow.
I'm always thinking like, you know, you can't, I mean, what do you do when there is this way to keep your stuff protected, but then also have like some sort of entry if something happens and somebody needs to.
I know there's actual services that will do that for you, but then I'm very suspect of stuff like that. I think it's kind of a, you know, if I get hit by a bus document and then having a very specific like, yeah, and you know, having these things password protected or.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point, which is that if you use a password manager, usually what happens is that the password manager will fill in all of your passwords for you, and then you have one super password. So writing that super password down and actually keeping it somewhere really secure, like a safe, isn't a bad idea. So a lot of people are like, well, don't ever write your password down. You can write it down, just don't put it on the fridge.
Yeah.
You know, just make sure that it's in like a really safe place. But in terms of like how that works out with social media and stuff, there are like that's to me is being really. I'm seeing really interesting things play out over time, relating to like digital graveyards and stuff like that. So I just have some options for password managers here, and then of course the only thing that I didn't put on the first slide is enabling two-factor authentication. It's, again, something that's become more and more popular, which I'm really, really pleased about. It just means that there are two things that you have to do to be able to get into your account. So I'd say that this is something you for sure need to do for really, really sensitive information like your bank account. And it's really simple to add those in. Usually it's just the settings on whatever bank that you use.
And hackers are getting really ingenious, even with two-factor authentication. There's a great reply all about people trying to get a very specific Instagram name or Instagram handle, and because there's two-factor authentication built into your login for Instagram, hackers were actually flashing SIM cards with people's telephone numbers so that the two-factor authentication would go to that phone and they'd be able to get in that way.
Yeah, so if somebody has, for example, your iCloud account information and you're using two-factor, all they have to do is log into Messages and then grab that code that's sent to your phone to then log in. So it doesn't save you from everything, but it is a good, you do want to enable this for some really, really important information. I'm gonna actually skip over this because I realize that we're getting to 4, and if anybody needs to leave at 4, you're more than welcome to leave. I'm gonna kind of go over the more important ones moving forward. We just have a couple of things left. So in terms of the most secure that you could be with your passwords is using multi-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication is 2 things and multi is more than 2. And this basically works on the concept of something you know, like a password, something you have, like a YubiKey that's pictured there, and then something you are. So that could be a biometric data, so fingerprint or eye. So in combination, all of these 3 things make for a really secure login. But I'd say that just having one of them isn't the best. And that's true for your biometric data. So with iPhone and a lot of other phones, people have been using the Face ID, people use the thumbprint to get in. These are all systems that have been really easily shown to be hacked. So this is an example of a group that whenever the Face ID came out, they just created these like silicone faces that they were easily able to get in. Of course, you've also seen the ones where people would show like a picture or like a twin to get into those accounts. And then, of course, too, there's a bunch of options for getting through to fingerprint stuff. So people lifting it off of the phone itself, another hacking group using 3D printing to like just scan an image of somebody online. So if there's like a picture of me like going like this, you could zoom in enough to get like my thumbprint and then 3D print that to get into like whatever the biometric data you have. So beware of just using that. I'd say that in combination with something else, like a multi-factor, is a good option for you. I haven't talked about it that much, but this YubiKey is something that you can order online and that you can use in addition to or to just regular two-factor. And it's just a key that you put into your USB key that you put into your computer to be able to log in.
Worth mentioning, kind of along those lines too, is that if you enter your phone through your fingerprint, so can the police.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
So you should bypass that, don't do the facial recognition, and just do your passcode, because that's protected.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm getting to here is that, so this 100-mile border zone, so there's this law in the US that anywhere 100 miles from the border, it breaks down some of the regular search and seizure laws that we have. So that includes being able to ask people to use their thumb or their face to log into their phone. What they can't ask you, because then it becomes like a Fifth Amendment, it's a Fifth Amendment issue, is they can't ask you to tell them, because you can say, I plead the Fifth, I'm not going to tell you anything, but they can make you use your hands and your face.
Wow.
So that's something, anybody that lives 100 miles from the border, I think it's good advice to give people to definitely don't use those biometric data options. In fact, like what a lot of people do, and this is an ACLU link that talks more and more about this, and I think is like really useful. What some people will offer for you to do is just to turn your phone off if you're getting into those areas.
That's all Hawaii, like all.
Oh, it looks like it. So just always keep your phone off.
Yeah.
So again, I know we're kind of out of time here, and I'd like to get to at least one thing. So maybe I can find out what social media is like the group shares a consensus on. So maybe who here uses Facebook?
I hate it. I don't want to use it.
Same.
But I can't keep in touch with people that I've met internationally.
Yeah, no,
Or
you
event,
don't. I
local
have
events.
the same events. I mean, dog spotting saves my life. Just a group of people that post pictures of dogs. But no, events and keeping in touch with family and friends, that's like, I don't know how any other way around it.
And we've become kind of like captive to that service, which is kind of scary in that sense. I mean, Instagram probably as artists, right? Which becomes, like it has utility, right? There's networking, it's keeping up with things to see. But once again, that balance of the utility versus convenience versus, security concerns.
Right, so and the good thing just to keep in mind, mention it with the VPN, but if any service is free, you are the product of that service. That means that there's data being collected about you and can possibly be used against you or can possibly use to things that you maybe don't politically agree with. So that's just true for anything, and that's certainly true with social media because, right, we don't pay for it with money, but we are paying for it as being part of that product.
I actually read recently that the reason TVs have become so cheap is because they are harvesting so much data.
Yes. The smart TVs, you'll notice, have very different, well, not very different, but it's different prices. It's a cheaper price than the ones that don't have that option. It's because, they want you to log into your YouTube account. They want you to log in and all different kinds of accounts and be able to harvest that data from you.
Yeah, we recently bought two 60-inch TVs for exhibition purposes that have smart features built into them. And we're pretty surprised at how cheap they were. But you turn it on and there's advertisements
immediately
already on this thing, right? And that's bizarre.
You have to click, and you have to click through a lot to get past the smart functions, because we pretty much just use them to have media players, and to find that media player, it's kind of like a hassle.
But to not be able to control the content on something you supposedly own is very strange, right?
Yeah. So in using social media, there's a couple of different things you can do to be more secure. So first off, just using good password hygiene like we talked about, updating like we talked about, but then also making sure that you're not sharing information that's too personal that people could find for social engineering attacks. Also, I see this is like a personal project of mine, is to just remind people that they can block whoever they want on social media. I think that there's too much negativity on there, and that for some reason, that's not something that people do that often. But, you can keep yourself safe, like your mental health safe. It doesn't just have to be your like digital privacy safe by blocking any kind of people that are on there, as well as spam. So like the more that people are blocking spam accounts, the less that we'll see them. And then just the other thing is that you want to also assume, even if you have like a private account, that everything that you post or do on social media is public. That's something I think that's more and more coming to the public consciousness, but just a really quick, good example of like where this breaks down is this case study with John McAfee. So he's created the really popular antivirus software. He had, since when this event happened, he had left the company years and years before, so he's not really associated with it anymore, but if that name sounds familiar, that's because of the antivirus software. So he was wanted by officials in, I think, Belize for there was a death of his neighbor. I will say right now that he was not involved in the death of the neighbor at all, but the authorities did want to talk to him about it, and he was like, he didn't want to talk to them, he was on the run from them. But what he was doing along the way was blogging. He was taking pictures of his travels and uploading them to Flickr. So whenever you this time, whenever you uploaded images to Flickr, it saved the EXIF data, which just includes the geolocation of where that image was taken. So really, really quickly, people found where he was, and he was questioned by the police. So most of the social media people use, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, will wipe any EXIF data off whenever you upload, because it's basically creating a new image. But it is, again, just a good example of how everything that you post could be public, even the things that you're hiding. So even your location that you think that you're hiding could be available. All right, so these last three ones, I'm sorry. These last three, or the last slides show you how to get into your settings to see what these companies know about you or what they think that they know about you. So the other side effect of privacy and social media is becoming a cog in the surveillance capitalism machine. So that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Surveillance capitalism, if you're not super familiar with it, is a term coined by Shoshana Zuboff, which describes a new economic system that relies on the commodification of personal information. So really, we see this through targeted ads. It's a super good example of where that comes down. You going to some site searching for something and then seeing that product advertised to you in a completely different site. That's something that's been going on for a long time, but the more that data collection occurs, the more we're seeing surveillance capitalism happen. And some of, like I was telling Tamara earlier, some of the most devastating effects that I have seen as a result of surveillance capitalism are the 2016 US presidential election interferences with things like Cambridge Analytica and the Internet Research Agency. So what I like to do, or what I wanted to do, is to go into these settings, or if people are following along and they want to see what the internet knows about you or what the internet thinks it knows about you, is you can go to those settings. I'll be real vulnerable with y'all right now and show you, oh wait, no, I cannot sign into Facebook. I got logged out because of my password. Maybe, can you?
Yeah. Oh, log into.
No, on your Facebook.
Yeah.
You can do this, just like you did before.
Yeah. Here, let me go. Settings, ads. So if I go to settings and then ads, and then your interest, my interests are, so it'll show different things like publications, TV shows, so news and entertainment. It has like Game of Thrones, Hulu, Wired Magazine, Cosmopolitan Magazine. I don't know, maybe.
Nice.
And then like TV reality shows, gamer, just kind of these more ambiguous sort of things.
So if you are following along, so the first one you see is news and entertainment. I can't do it on there, I'm sorry. But these are the steps that you take. But if you're following along and you see news and entertainment, there are different tabs there.
So news and entertainment, business and industry, these are the different tabs or subsections. So under business and industry, it says Warbley Parker. I don't have any of those glasses, but online degree, also don't have that, but maybe something I'll think about getting. Nonprofit organization, yes, right?
So what I'll point out here is that if you hover over each of these topics, is that there's a X in the top right-hand corner that you can just X out, and then it won't show you those advertisements again. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Aren't you giving them more information though by telling them what you don't want to see?
It could, yeah.
Right,
I mean, could be.
Because then they're like, oh, we need to
But it's-
fine-tune the algorithm to find out exactly what.
But I think it's a long con game, because if you just keep Xing out, then it's everything, yeah, then don't show me anything.
And then how much do you care about your actual ad experience on Facebook? So you could start, subverting that and being like, yeah, I'm really into Cosmopolitan magazine or something, right? So yeah.
The sim-
That's a stronger strategy, actually. I think disinformation is maybe the best way to try to smoke screen.
Yeah, spoof the things.
So in terms of maybe utilizing some of this info or data in your artistic practice, in all of the accounts I'm showing you in Facebook and Instagram and in Twitter, you can download the data that you created on these sites. So I will give you a warning now that if you do that and if you've been using these sites for years, it takes a long time to download that information. But you can set it up to download and just kind of like leave your computer running.
This is especially important if we go to the next side, if you want to leave Facebook, but actually retain the data that you've created over this time. Nick Breeze has, and he keeps it updated because of course Facebook is always going to change the way in which their interface works and the way that they're storing the information. But he has like a bit of JavaScript that you can run in the browser to help you save all of your content and then delete that content. And he goes through, very systematically finding all the stuff that you might want to retain while also deleting it completely from, because there isn't actually a way to delete your Facebook. If you deactivate your account, it's just that, it's deactivating. It's not actually deleting that data. So this is actually getting it off of the platform.
Yeah. So again, because it's 4:10 now, so we should probably be wrapping up, but I do have the settings or the options here on the slides that are available online, and again, I can email stuff to you guys if you want, for how to see this information on Instagram and as well as Twitter. So for mine, so whenever Zach and I were preparing this, we were both in our Instagram settings and we played a little game where we would read out what our settings were. And one thing that we found to be really interesting was how similar a lot of the settings are. And
After about 20 items, they started syncing up like perfectly, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, but
Oh, Instagram settings?
Oh, I remember now, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Good job.
what? It seems like they always want to bury it about six folders in,
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't really want, it's the
They don't
same.
want
It's
you to
another
look.
example of them making the information hard for you to gather.
But then when someone, critiques them on like their transparency and they go, oh no, it's there. You got to dig for it.
So you'll notice if you're following along that before you hit access data, which is where it will show you your ad interests, is right below that is the download data. So this is how you can get all the information that you've saved on Instagram. Okay, so mine's loading. Yeah, that ads interest is like way at the bottom. So yeah, I'll just read you like my top 5. Online shopping, cosmetics, shopping, luxury goods. Look at me. I don't know. Jewelry, shoes, clothing. It's like I don't know. I feel like I don't interact with that stuff that much. But I mean, of course, that's just the way that they're seeing the behavior that I have on Instagram. Okay. So the same thing for Twitter, where you can download that data as well as see your interests. I'll go there and see if there's anything interesting. For people that are following along, are you finding some interesting things about yourself? Well, so I did a project that you're familiar with called I posted about surveillance capitalism on Facebook so that surveillance capitalism would show me surveillance capitalism t-shirt ads, and it worked. And the thing about that project was that I had all of my things turned off, and I could still see my ad interests, but I never got my targeted ad with all of my stuff turned off. As soon as I checked all of my ad preferences on again, I got it with less than 24 hours. It was like a couple of hours that I got the ad for the t-shirt that I was like looking for.
So even if you're not clicking on the ads, I've seen some metrics and things that whenever you're scrolling, if you stop scrolling and kind of look at something for a bit,
yeah.
it's actually recording that, and it's being like, oh, they find that interesting.
Attention
Send
is
some more of that.
currency, so they're tracking that kind of attention.
I noticed that a lot with Instagram, actually.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think that Facebooks are the most interesting, and I think it's just because they've been around for longer and they've been doing those advertisements for longer. So I get much more granular information on Facebook than I do on Instagram, which is why I think it's for me, when I look at those Instagram ads, I'm like, I don't see myself in that data, but with Facebooks, it's a little more fine-tuned. All right, so we're kind of at the end here. So again, I just wanted to leave some resources for y'all. If you're curious about staying in touch with this kind of information, I have 3 really good options here for journalists that utilize or that report on these things. The Great Hack is a documentary that's on Netflix that details more, or goes into more detail on the Cambridge Analytica data hacks. That's okay.
A little recursion.
The Reply All podcast is one that both Zach and I really, really enjoy. It's usually about tech and culture, but the ones that I have segmented out here are specifically about hacking, including the one that Zach mentioned about Snapchat. And then I just have some other things here. So a lot of this information that I shared with you today is from EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, as well as this book that I read by Kevin Mitnick, Art of Invisibility. All right, so thank you so much. I have my email here if you guys ever want to email me and or Zach. I'm sorry that I went over, but I again really appreciate y'all being here.
Yeah, very much. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Let's get this mic off. Oh, the last.